Get in, fellas. We're going to therapy. Happy Wednesday, February 12th. And the Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champs. What a blowout that game. Congrats to the Eagles and everyone of the Philadelphia. Because the game was so boring, we're going to focus on the Super Bowl ads today. What made us laugh, what made us cry, what focused on mental health, and what danced around it. Where me and Richie are going to be joined by a good pal of ours, Shapiro. He was on the show at the very beginning in the CBT block. He does advertising and makes commercials for a living. So we thought, let's bring on his expertise to talk about advertising from all those different emotional angles. Following that, today is the introduction to the neurodiversity block. We're going to be covering on many different neurodivergent conditions during this block to help build empathy and understanding of these conditions. What is life like for somebody who struggles or thrives with them, and what makes them different than our neurotypical days-to-days. And I'm very, very fortunate today to be joined by a pal I've made on the internet. His name is Dr. Matt Zakreski, a real Jersey boy, who's joining today as the author of the Neurodiversity Playbook to talk about neurodiversity, the concept, and help us set the stage to talk about conditions like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, OCD, Tourette's. We're going to cover all those over the next month. So it's going to be a lot of learning. And we will wrap up today by inducting a Bromotions Hall of Fame inductee where diagnoses were not common, and yet popular opinion would have us believe that Charles Darwin would be considered a neurodivergent king. All right. As always, let's go. All right, team, welcome back for the first episode of the Neurodiversity block. We have a familiar face. Our good friend Andrew Joseph Shapiro was once living in Denver, moved back to Atlanta. Me and Richie's heart has been empty, more empty ever since.
Let's talk about it.
And so we bring AJ on today, one, because congratulations again to the Eagles. The game itself was a snooze fest, and AJ is an advertising exec. No, that just sounds fancy. What's your title?
Definitely not exec, hardly even close to like kind of senior, but a creative writer for advertising.
Yeah, cool. So AJ, obviously we know him well, and he has a role in making commercials. And we're like, dude, let's talk about the ads. We're going to talk about the ads we liked. We're going to talk about what we didn't like, the mental health spin on things. But AJ is going to start us off with a cool spin on like what makes a commercial? How do we develop a commercial, and what are advertisers looking for when they invest millions of dollars in a Super Bowl product?
Yeah, I mean, it's an insane amount of money just to get the airtime, much less do the production itself and whatever those celebrities, each one of them costs crazy amounts of money.
Those Dunkin' commercials, I'm sure.
If you're packing like 6 of them, yeah. So it's crazy what goes into them. Generally, you're getting these what we call briefs, which is like from the client through a strategist, basically saying, here's what you're trying to communicate on behalf of the client. Let's go with like the classic one that everybody teaches is like Snickers. Snickers wanted to not be a candy. They wanted to be a snack. And so they wrote the line, hungry, grab a Snickers. And they built their advertisement around this insight, which is always something you're trying to find, which is like people get angry when they're hungry. People get annoying when they're hungry.
Yeah.
And so they wrote the line, you're not you when you're hungry. They ran those hangry commercials. And so that's essentially what you're trying to do in anything is take what they're trying to communicate, find a clever way to do it, and find an insight to hang your idea on. And if you can't do that, then just turn seal into a seal, because that's going to work 100% of the time.
I do think it's awesome. Like Mountain Dew, they don't need to advertise. Pringles, they don't need to advertise. So they're just like, fuck it. We got $5 million. Let's just lay it down and get Eugene Levy's fucking mustache to fly all over the place, or his eyebrows.
It is interesting that some of like the most recognizable brands spend the most money on just becoming like more or equally as recognizable. And they don't say much. It's usually the safest you'll ever be is in a Super Bowl ad, which is interesting because you spend the most money, but all you're really trying to do is in the top of the funnel as far as how we think about it in advertising, which is like awareness, consideration, and conversion. Conversion being where we get you to click now. Consideration is like, here's a little bit more info on that thing you lingered on the internet. Those are the cookies working. Yeah. And then awareness is you might not know about us at all, or it might be an iconic, recognizable brand, but we just want you to remember us and think
Yeah.
about us the next time. We're not necessarily trying to sell you something right now. We just want to be at the top of your mind when you are thinking about it.
Can you
And
think about anybody off the top of your head that you thought succeeded in their missions that you really felt positively about?
I mean, the few that stick out, like, Seal becoming a SEAL for what was that, Mountain Dew.
I saw
Uh,
Variety's top like 15 list did not have that commercial on their list, and I was like, you bastard! That
it
is
seems to be the one
crazy.
people are chatting about. It seems to be the one that people like thought was so ridiculous, and like that's kind of the brilliance of it. It's kind of in that feel of like those old Spice commercials where he's like, "I'm on a horse," and it's
Yeah.
like absurdist. It's how much can we pack into this craziness? You're like, what the hell did I just see? Kind of vibes. I like there is no strategy there. There's no like here's the great genius insight, but I like the idea as somebody that has written a handful of commercials in my day, like to think about the writer in that room who took the word Baja and realized it kind of sounds like the intro to that Seal song and then ran from there.
Yeah,
Like just the whatever they were smoking late night trying to think of this idea, throwing things at the
sure,
whiteboard, and that's what they landed
sure.
on is great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I thought of, I really enjoyed when the stand up to anti-Semitism, stand up to hate, Robert Kraft's organization
Mm-hmm.
did with Snoop and Tom Brady. That those ads I think in general have been like pretty safe, and like who are you including, whose attention are you getting, and Brady and Snoop went back and forth of like kind of yelling like what are the reasons we don't like each other. And I just thought, I was like, damn, it's cool, like especially for a brand like that. You're not getting anything out of it other than, like you said, awareness. Like they're not
Yeah,
necessarily making money, they're not, but it's the idea is like, let's open up some ears and eyes that we might not normally.
I like that one a lot. I don't know that like sometimes I get a little annoyed by the sentimental ones. You're like, just I don't want to see Sarah McLachlan singing to sad puppies, but like
Yeah.
sometimes that's what sticks, so it's a little.
Google going emotional has been really successful though,
Mm,
right? Like I don't remember years ago that was. It was like the dad like putting together like a life set of videos for his daughter in the future. It was the first time they did that, and I was like, "Oh, these motherfuckers," because it's been
yeah.
successful.
No, I think that one was fun. We got to talk about the feel goodness of, or is it even feel good or just like powerfulness of the Dove one? That's the girl running, and basically, well, I don't know what age she was, but it was like at 4, your legs are unstoppable. By 14, you're
Yeah.
too self conscious to continue playing the sport you're playing. I don't think those are the actual words, but that was the gist.
Yeah, that like this body dissatisfaction will have you drop out from sports. And AJ, I appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, overall, that was my favorite commercial. I mean, anyone of listens to this show knows that I worked in the eating disorder world, and I was sitting next to Richie. I was like giddy because I have never seen, and I've watched a lot of commercials, guys. I love TV. A commercial that brought eating disorder awareness into the public spectrum, and we know Dove generally does a very good job with body positivity and beauty at all shapes and sizes. But I cannot think of a single commercial on a national basis that said we need to think about how we're talking to women about their bodies. And intentionally or not, it was, I think it might have been the same block. Maybe it was one block after the Hims commercial that was like selling Hims and Hers, that was selling the Ozempic, basically like you're not going to be happy unless you use this and lose weight. And I just thought like the juxtaposition of those two just shows how complicated that is in our country.
Yeah, and I think what's nice is if you think about the hymns one, which was rough around the edges, it was tough, but you know exactly what they're selling, which is weight loss medication. They're telling you you will be happy if you lose all this weight. Dove is selling soap. They're like they know their brand is so powerful. You know what Dove is. They again are not trying to get you to buy now, go to the store. They are just like, let's take a minute to buy an incredibly expensive piece of real estate and promote body positivity because
Yeah.
that's what we do.
Yeah.
And then when you go to buy soap, you'll be like, I'm gonna get Dove because they seem like good people. Whether that's true or not, they could all
Yeah.
be terrible people inside, but like probably not. But my
You
point
know
is,
what what hurts, AJ, and I think about this a lot as with the podcast, we've gotten involved more in social media, Richie, and I've been pretty committed to like not going negative on the show. Like, do this if you suck at blah blah. Like we like the psychology of advertising. So Hims, as much as like a lot of people are right, the backlash has been like, you can't say people can only be happy if they lose weight. It can't be the main focus. I guarantee that commercial is going to work because that does work in advertising. Appealing to people's insecurity works, I
well,
would
also
think.
there's a reason that product exists beyond just like some people need to lose weight literally for their health. Some people are doing weight because it'll make them feel good outside and in. And that's
Yeah.
real. And I'm not trying to deny that for some people they will feel mentally better. Like it's not
Yeah.
wrong that, but to put it on your billboard basically saying like this is the only way, or this is how one feels good is by being thin and blah blah blah.
Any reasonable person could, and South Park did a special on this, right? So it's they're being thoughtful on it, but like the Ozempic craze, like this is a short-term thing that in the long term we're going to know was not good. And as we talk about like how to talk to young girls about their bodies, and so I think it's an important time. I have some patients who work in fashion who are like, oh dude, thin has never gone away in the fashion world. Like even though there's CrossFit and big butts and whatever, like it's at this point as anxiety and social media are creeping up that we need to be aware of how this is impacting people.
Sure, and as like a adult male, I'm like, man, I'd love to lose some lbs, and like,
Yeah.
wouldn't it? As a bald guy, I'm always just like, like it's pretty tough to like show up one day with a full head of hair, and I know the technology's out there, but like it's pretty tough to just like try to convince people it came back naturally. I feel the same way about taking the shots. I'm like, it'd be pretty easy to like lose some weight that way, but I'm gonna keep chugging along at the gym until I
What's
completely kill myself.
right. But and again, it's a complicated issue, which is why a solution like Ozempic that gives fast results without an appropriate like mental preparation, without long-term behavior change, because again, I don't know how well people know that you need to stay on the medicine for the rest of your life, that it has both mental health and physical side effects that impact people. People are all this like stuff where it's not just positive. And so, I really think that juxtaposition was the mental health thing that focused to me the most, because the thing that is impacting the mental health of the host of this podcast is Kanye pulled an effective move. And as terrifying as it is, right? We're talking about like if it was effective and people are talking and like, holy fucking fuck.
Yeah, I mean, as a Jewish person, I'm like deeply disturbed, and I saw that the website has been taken down, and they're trying to do the appropriate things to like walk back what happened. It's tough. Like the one thing you'll say about Kanye is like it's super effective. I don't know how many people went to that website, but like I did. I was like,
I
yeah,
did.
what's at Yeezy.com? Let's see what the fuck this lunatic is up to.
It's hard for you to put words in because it's how do we make sense of it?
Yeah, I mean, I saw today that he has more Twitter followers. He has double the amount of Twitter followers as there are Jews on the entire planet. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. Like he's got a long, wide reach. He's certainly letting people that have evil thoughts feel validated, because I see him as more of an instigator than anything else. Like he runs on the third rail, he lives on it, and he certainly is a contrarian in a way that's like, I'm gonna do whatever you're gonna tell me I can't do. And so
Yeah.
every time people are like, you shouldn't be anti-Semitic, Kanye, he's like, bet, let me
Right.
double down. And so I don't know if he even is aware of like how dangerous it is, or yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think we long ago lost, I at least lost like the sympathy for Kanye as like a person who clearly has mental illness in addition to being an asshole. And so it's like at some point it's that like paradox of tolerance we talk about on the show, which is like, bro, you lost my sympathy and understanding where his point of view comes from a very, very long time ago. And we're long past that. I think we could talk on ads for a long time, but I'll make a smooth transition to, if you want to go to a website that has cool t-shirts advertised, getinfellowspod.com. The store is up and running. No, I just wanted to make a shameless plug. But guys, we'll transition into our interview with Matt Zakreski, author of the Neurodiversity Playbook, and introducing neurodiversity to our audience. But first, this is the last segment I'm recording. Just realized that February 12th, when this episode is released, is the birthday of our BHoF inductee Charles Darwin, and same birthday, same year as Abraham Lincoln. So, fun fact, two very influential people. If you learned one thing on the podcast today, how about that? AJ, you didn't know that before you came in tonight. Don't know if you needed to, but it's also the episode release date. How about that?
I'm fascinated by a good fun fact. I'm into that one. Also, I love those videos that are like, did you know this happened at the same time as this? I was unaware that Charles Darwin and Abraham Lincoln were in the same run.
Yeah, how about it? All right, we'll be back after the break, y'all. Dr. Zakreski, as we do start with our guests on the Get In Fellas podcast, do you have a preferred vocal exercise to help us warm up?
Oh, man.
I know you were a musical guy.
So the way that we always warmed up on freshman weekend in college for theater stuff is we did the following vocal exercise. So see if you can keep up with me. I'll run it through first, and then you can follow me. I am a mother pheasant plucker. I pluck mother pheasants. I am the most pleasant mother pheasant plucker who ever plucked a mother pheasant.
Hold on. This is more of a memory test than it is a vocal warm up.
I
am a pheasant mother plucker.
Mother pheasants.
I pluck mother pheasants. I am the most pleasant peasant mother pheasant
plucked a mother pheasant.
Whoever plucked a mother pheasant. Is the goal there? You're trying to get people, because we can swear on this show, Matt. So is the goal you're trying to get people to drop motherfucker in the middle of there? That's what it felt like I was being
small
set
hazing,
up for.
Right? Well, I mean, that was. Imagine doing that on stage when you're a freshman in college and your family's there for family weekend, and all the upperclassmen are like, "Yo, man, let's hang out in the green room, have a shot with me." And then like, okay, first we get up there, and then you have to do this vocal exercise. And you're like, I'm not going to scream motherfucker in front of my mom. I'm not going to scream motherfucker in front of my mom. Right. But whenever I need to get like into gear, I always do the mother pheasant.
Brings back positive vibes from college. So team and crowd, we are very, very fortunate to have Dr. Matt Zakreski today joining us as we kick off the neurodiversity block. So Dr. Zakreski is a native of Roxbury, New Jersey. As a result, he is a fan of the New Jersey sports teams, New Jersey Devils, the Yankees, as most Jersey's folks are, the Phillies, the New York Giants, sorry about times lately, and the Philadelphia Union in the MLS. We've had a lot of success. He did his undergrad. He's a Demon Deacon down on Tobacco Road in Wake Forest, where he apparently also was musically talented. And he got his psychology degree. So he is a psychologist versus psychiatrist, but all different types of therapists at Widener University. And his mindful hobbies include walking with music and podcasts. And Matt, I'll just beat you right to it, man. We're going to do a shameless plug here. I have a copy of the good Dr. Zakreski's book back behind me, the Neurodiversity Playbook, how neurodivergent people can crack the code of living in a neurotypical world. So I was really, really lucky to have Dr. Zakreski reach out a few months ago and see how he could help, because he's, a fellow bro, a fellow kinder, gentler bro, and is really on a mission to help educate people about neurodiversity, especially kids, but also people in general, and how we can create a more inclusive world. So thanks, Matt. Thank you so much for joining us.
Mine. And, there's so many people in this space right now, like podcasting, it's hard to find the good ones. But when you got on my radar and I dug in, I was like, set this up immediately, right? I cannot tell you how many podcasts I've been on, and none of them have ever asked my favorite sports team. So like the vibes are immaculate, right?
Unfortunately, not so much with the G-men, and but you have this Philly crossover, so you're not claiming any Eagles. We're shooting this,
Right.
a week or two before the Super
I
Bowl.
would say I am so happy for Saquon. He deserves it. I mean, I hope that I hope when this episode goes live, we are celebrating the Eagles winning the championship and he got Super Bowl MVP. Nothing would make me happier because it's like if your buddy was in a really shitty band and you just knew if your buddy got out of that shitty band, that band could make it. So like he took his bass and he went down I-95 and now he's in Philly, right? You got AJ Brown on drums and you've got Jalen on lead guitar, and it's just Nick Sirianni is like, he's got like the tambourine in the corner. He's not very good at it.
He is. He's the triangle player. Just like, don't do anything crazy, Nick.
In this space. This is your space.
Yeah. And even, Matt, I love that you're leading us off with a kindness lesson, because I can imagine a lot of New York Giants fans, maybe the ones who aren't as mature, aren't as grown as we would like them to come along to be, angry at Saquon. And the rest of us are like, well,
right,
they didn't sign him, right? And so that often happens with sports fans, is it's such an us versus them mentality where everyone's like, oh, fuck you, Saquon. And it's like, well, he was a free agent. They didn't extend him. He went to the highest bidder. And, especially with how running back contracts are, it seems like Saquon may push the narrative back a little bit. With his 1-year deal, it might be like, well, if guys coming off their rookie contract, they're probably worth a little more stability and money than that.
And it really, I think as a psychologist, right, one of the things that's so interesting to me is the idea of like when envy outweighs empathy, right? So it's like, man, like Saquon got it, they backed the Brinks truck up for him. He got his bag, as they say. And like, it's easy if you're, Johnny Sixpack, in, Middletown, New Jersey, reading this, you're like, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't betray my team. Yes, you freaking would. Like, yes, if someone's offering you 30 million versus 6 million to do the thing you love to do, I mean, there are very few humans who wouldn't take the bag. And what happens is that our envy, because we weren't put in that situation, we weren't given that opportunity, overwhelms our proclivity for empathy. And, we sort of double down on the shittiest parts of ourselves.
I was thinking something the other day with one of my patients, Matt, just as you talked about envy, was we talked about what makes people intimidating. And we tried to control for people who are just big and maybe seem scary, right? Or like they're angry or something like that. But we also get intimidated by other people. What do you think leads us to be intimidated by people who aren't like physically threatening?
I mean, I love that you brought this up. Like, so in college, there was this kid that lived with one of my best friends. They had a house off campus. We called it the Wharf because the backyard always flooded. So we called it the Wharf. And this kid was probably 5'7", 5'8", maybe. And I don't want to put him on blast. I'll call him Steve, right? Steve, solid fake name. Now, Steve was not the biggest guy. He was not the funniest guy. He was not the sexiest guy. But what Steve had, I think he honestly was a sociopath. Steve didn't care about the rules of society, right? And like, we were hanging out there. It's like a Friday afternoon. And my buddy Will's like, yo, man, my girlfriend's flying in from Phoenix today. We're like, yo, Will, let's go. That's awesome. And he's like, can you go pick her up from the airport? Steve's like, I'll go get you. I got you, bro. I'll go to the airport for you. And so Will goes to class. Steve goes to the airport. And then like, we're all still hanging out. And then like, Will comes back from work. Steve has not returned. And like, so he's calling them and he's calling her and nobody's picking up. And like 4 hours later, they roll in, they go right to his room. And she literally sent him a text that said, I'm breaking up with you. I'm with Steve now. So in the 90-minute drive from the airport back to campus, this guy, like, you just don't do that. You just don't do that as a bro. I don't care if it's Kate Upton who gets off the goddamn plane, right? Like,
no, you don't do it as a kinder, gentler bro, but it does, Matt. I think it helps us in many ways. One, the answer that we came to was confidence. What are people intimidated by is generally confidence, because people in general have enough social anxiety when they walk around the world that even if they believe in themselves, that it usually takes a little bit of gassing up. And so people wouldn't be intimidated by them. And so it's interesting that you say that, because it allows us to dive right into neurodiversity, which you're joining us as an expert today, because it's often the experience of neurodiverse people, to have some intimidation, some envy of those who aren't struggling, especially
Absolutely.
when they're growing up. So it just made me think about that idea of like intimidation comes from confidence, which if we're doing good parenting, we can build up
Absolutely.
anybody to be confident. So Matt, you talk on neurodiversity all the time, starting with how do we define this term that is probably newer to most of our audience?
Yeah.
And we'll go from there.
And there's going to be an even better connection that we organically got to. So that you can say there are broadly three terms we need to know here. The first is neurotypical. So 80% of the world is neurotypical. Their brains function basically as we'd expect them to function for their age and phase of life, right? Cool. They're doing what they're supposed to do. 20% of brains are neurodivergent. That means they differ in not only function, but also form. We can point to literal brain differences on scans and say, this person's amygdala works differently. This person's parietal lobe works differently. We can point to that stuff. Now, the world is built for and by neurotypical people, right? What this means is that the rules are built for people who understand those rules. But if you have a different brain and you're on a different wavelength, and right, we've tested mirror neurons, and we know that neurodivergent people, their mirror neurons fire at a different rate than those people who are neurotypical. So like when a neurotypical person's like, oh, well, we can blow off this class, or I can jaywalk here, or like, yeah, she says she's dating that guy, but I'm a slide in her DMs anyway. They're picking up vibes because they're on the same wavelength as those people. One of the things I think always that marks people as neurodivergent is they never know when they can break the rules, right? It's like, what do you mean? How did you guys all know we could cut the class today? Why is it okay to have a senior skip day, but why I can't cut class on a Tuesday to go see Dave Matthews Band? Like, why did I get in trouble for that? And you guys didn't get in trouble for that. I mean, it was literally stuff that like you're just not vibing on. And it's not, and if you don't know that comes from a place of a literal brain difference, you're going to blame yourself, right? You're going to be like, it's not my brain's fault. It's me. Yeah. It's my problem, right? If I can tell an embarrassing story about myself, if we're being, right? So my freshman year in high school, I was assigned to work on this project with one of the pretty popular girls in school, right? And we'll call her Kim, not her real name. So we do a couple of workshops for this project, and like we're sitting at the kitchen table in her house. Her parents are very nice. And then the third time I come over to work on the project, she's like, why don't you come upstairs to my bedroom? And I was like, I guess that's where we're going to work today, right? So we're sitting in there and like we're working on our assignment, and we finished the assignment. She's like, well, now what do you want to do? I'm like, well, I guess I should go home. It's a school night, right? Because here I am as this very neurodivergent person who was not picking up the signals. And the next day, Kim would not talk to me. And my best friend was like, dude, you so bad. I was like, what did I do? What did I do? He's like, why do you think she wanted to work in her bedroom? And why do you think she shut the door? I was like, what? Oh my God. But it's the sort of thing, like she was using moves that would have worked on a neurotypical person. My dumbass was like, I am here to do working I shall do. Doop, doop, bop, bip, beep, boop, boop. Time to go home, right? And it haunted my dreams, for many years. We, at a reunion, we laughed about it and took a shot together, and that was the end of that story. But like, it's the sort of thing, like the rules of the game were built by the people who play the game. We were just sort of conscripted into the game, right? It's like you find yourself like rounding out your buddies like fantasy football league, and you don't really know what the rules are, but like, I guess I have to play because they need 12 dudes. That's what a lot of neurodivergent people feel like.
It's interesting because the first thing that it makes me think about that we know that often seems odd or intimidating or unaware is direct communication is not the code as you refer to in the neurodiversity playbook, right? That there is a code, or a way of being in this world that is generally the social norm. And one of those is it's not direct communication. And so in your situation with Kim, it wasn't like Kim was like, hey, Matt, I think you're really sweet and cute. And do you want to kiss? Right.
I mean, I would have tackled her like, like nobody's business, right? It would have been so on, but like, that's just not how my brain worked at the time.
So we're thinking about just some of those, some of those things, right? I'm thinking unaware or awkward. You're also describing as like rigid, some of those words that probably get picked up on for people when they're young. You said there's 3 terms to know. So I think you got neurodivergent, neurotypical. What's our last one?
Yeah. Last one is broadly neurodiversity. So neurodiversity is all the brains. Right. So a lot of people will conflate the terms neurodivergent and neurodiversity. So I like to say, like, here's the difference between those terms, right? Like, everything is diversity, but to be a divergent member of that class is a separate thing than being the sort of the majority, the typical thing in that group.
In this show, Matt, I'm generally trying to push people out in the world to not see things in black and white, that especially when it comes to mental health conditions, things are on a spectrum, right? And so how do you feel? I think the thing that upsets, me sometimes and people in the world of like, you either are neurodivergent or you aren't. And it gets sticky on social media. It gets, everyone's a little autistic, and then people are not happy with that comment. So how do you go about having that difficult conversation that seems to be out there in narratives these days?
Yeah. And you're speaking to the heart of this whole thing, because the last thing I would ever want to do is gatekeep this from somebody, right? If you saw a meaningful TikTok and you think you're neurodivergent, well, you know what? I'm going to treat that as true until we get evidence that says otherwise. Right. I think that I want to honor your experience. You're the expert of you. And the fact is, we don't know nearly enough about the brain to make a lot of decisions about this. We know more than we used to, certainly more than when I was a kid. But, there's new studies coming out all the time. I mean, until very recently, you couldn't be diagnosed as autistic and ADHD. They were like, you can't have both of them. It's one or the other. Now, AUDHD is a huge community online, right? People like that explain so much of who I am, because one neurodivergence drastically predicts other neurodivergences, right? So it really becomes one of those things that so much of what we're talking about here, and actually, I think the truest spectrum comes from fit to environment, right? So
I like that.
I grew up with a kid, and he, I'll call him Paul, super sweet kid. Like, just absolutely the word we would use for it is autistic. Like, I mean, 1,000%. Like, he had every sports statistic of all time memorized. Like, when he would show up at the basketball court, he would keep score for us. He wouldn't play. He would just be a human scoreboard, right? And he would say things. He's like, Matt, your shooting percentage is 41%. And I'm like, of course it is, buddy. Paul, you do you, right? But in our small town, where they have really good schools and teachers who gave a shit, nobody ever really, like, I don't know if he was formally diagnosed, but nobody treated him any different. He was in the same class as everybody, went to prom with us. It was not a thing. But then he tried to go to college, and he went to the big state school here in Jersey, right? Rutgers. And the wheels fell off immediately, because all of a sudden he's in an environment that isn't supportive of that, right? So, you can see people who their differences, their quirks are amplified by their environments, are mitigated by their environments, and here's what I'm trying to do as a psychologist, celebrated by their environments. I got to tour NASA last year down in Houston, like the Houston, we have a problem, Houston. And I was talking to this guy, he's like, oh, do you think there are a lot of gifted people here at NASA? And I was like, bruh, at NASA, where the rocket scientists live? Like, yeah. He's like, oh yeah, man. He's like, because I used to work in cell phone sales, and I hated it. I was really bad at cell phone sales. Everyone said I was dumb. He's like, but then I took a college class about quantum mechanics, and I thought, well, that's interesting. I should learn more about quantum mechanics. Yeah. And so now he has a doctorate, and he works at NASA. And it's just such a great example of like a guy who grew up like without great public schools, who didn't get a good education, who lucked into a class on quantum mechanics, Now he's working at NASA, right? But how many people are out there thinking that they're dumb or they don't fit in the universe because they never got that environment that celebrated them? They're environments that remind them of what they're not what they are.
Yeah, and it's the big purple book talks about social and occupational functioning, which I like to stick with. So, right, it's like that goodness of fit. If your environment is other people who have a similar code than you, then you're not going to be as much of an outcast that if you're not, right? So, an interesting way to think about it. What I try to do in my mind when I'm feeling like this is, it's becoming polarizing and I'm not loving that is like, we all have strengths, we all have challenges, and can we find ways in our treatment and in our lives to build on the strengths and also work on the challenges? So, again, a guy who is good at quantum mechanics is just probably not going to be good at sales, which is all about a social code.
Right, absolutely.
You've hinted on some of those brain differences, Matt. How do people are you born neurodivergent? Do people become neurodivergent? What do we understand about the construct, but even some of the main conditions people know?
So the vast majority of neurodivergences are developmental in nature. So they're genetically loaded, they come from being born, and that's how your brain grows up. So the most common ones there are ADHD, autism, giftedness, dyslexia, OCD. The vast majority of these things are neurodevelopmental in nature, right? Either you come online that way or you're genetically predisposed that way and your brain just develops in an ADHD way. Now, we also want to note that there are acquired neurodivergences, things you get from living life. So, Steve, you ever had a concussion?
I played football, my friend. I was out cold a couple times.
Right? You went like, oh, it's the third quarter. Well, that's new information.
Yeah. Specifically when I was on JV and I was playing scout team and they just tossed me off onto the sideline for a couple hours. I woke up like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm not a starter on varsity. So they just carried on. I was over here. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe dying. Right. Right. Yeah. Well, so if you have ever had a concussion, that's an acquired neurodivergence. Your brain was functioning differently at that time. If you know someone who's suffering from long COVID, that's another acquired neurodivergence. We're seeing those neurological changes over time. And broadly speaking, we know that trauma changes the brain, right? It's an epigenetic response. So if you're someone who grew up in a dangerous neighborhood, if you're someone who suffered abuse, if you're someone who, was involved in a horrific car crash or plane crash or something like that, we're seeing this a lot of our veterans, right? They're coming back with different brains, that are drastically impacted by the tidal waves of hormones and life experiences they got either when it's at Afghanistan or in Harlem or wherever that those things occurred. Yeah. So the majority of neurodivergences are developmental, but you certainly can acquire them along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because we talked about that 80-20. And this is just stuff that, Matt, maybe in our career, it'll shift the way we talk about it and define those things. Because you're saying, hey, neurotypical is 80%. It's within a spectrum of functioning. And I'm over here being like, we've all got acquired trauma, homeboy. Right? Yeah, right. And so it's interesting to think of, if we think of these things as changing over time, and what may be considered normal, hopefully that spectrum just continues to widen as we look to accept more and more people. Matt, when you're starting to teach this, if you're teaching, neurodivergence to a group of relatively lay people, what do you start off wanting them to know?
So I start off wanting them to know that neurodivergence provides a context to understanding a lot of how we act, how we feel, and how we think, right? Neurodivergent people, as a general rule, are just really intense. They're intense people. I know I'm an intense person, right? So, and as I often say to my clients, neurodivergence is always context. It's never an excuse, right? If you're autistic and you don't like how someone's talking to you, you don't get to punch them in the face because you're autistic. It doesn't work that way. You're allowed to say, stop talking to me. You're bothering me. You ought to say, like, I'm exiting this conversation because I can't handle this centrally. So it's a context piece. But the most important context piece here is that in the absence of information, our brains create our own narratives. right? This is a great example. Before I knew that having sensory sensitivities was a part of being gifted, right? And I grew up as a gifted kid. Like, I didn't know that having intense sensory needs is part of that. You ever been in a situation, Steve, where you've got those styrofoam packing peanuts,
Oh yeah.
right? And they make
Squeak
that
'em.
noise when they rub
Oh
together,
yeah. Oh
right?
yeah.
Yeah. If you ever saw me around those, you think I got hit by a taser. I'm like, I can't, I can't, I
Mm.
can't, I can't. And like, I just thought I was a freak. I thought I was broken, you know? And I asked my mom, like, was I like locked in a room filled with peanuts, or did like some babysitter like force me to eat them? She's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. They're just styrofoam packing peanuts, man. Of course, my mom is crazy misophonia, right? She can't stand when people chew behind her. She'll like leave movie theaters. She's like, nope, I'm out. It's too much chewing, right? So, you know, she's got sensory needs too. But that's the thing. It's like, if you don't know the community you're a part of, you lack the language and understanding that can help give you the context to better understand yourself, right? And so many people I talk to, you know, so many people are walking around with social anxiety disorder and oppositional defiant disorder diagnoses that are actually autistic, right? But because maybe their autism only shows up in a certain way, or they're from a community that didn't believe in autism, which is definitely a thing, they're just walking around thinking like, well, I hate people and I hate my boss, so ergo I am these things. But like, maybe autism better explains that, because we know autistic people can be pretty rigid, very black and white thinkers. They have a strong sense of justice. And if things are outside of their comfort zone, they can trigger that fight or flight response.
Sure.
You know, and I think that's such a powerful reframe for a lot of people, because it takes the target of your narrative and it takes away from broadly, this is me, to something a lot more nuanced. That's like, hey, this is how my brain works. You know, a lot of times I'll say to people like, you know, is there a weird thing about you? Like, do you need to be like chugging Red Bulls to get through class? Are you somebody who needs to only wear a certain kind of pants? For women, it's like, are there like makeup? Like, can you not wear makeup? Or like, is putting on like leggings like an impossible task? And a lot of times people will say yes. And I'm like, those are indicators of some sort of neurodivergence. It would tell me, let's further explore this.
Yeah.
There are so many times in life where we are walking around thinking that we're weird horses, but we're actually zebras. We've been zebras the whole time, but if you grow up on the field where there's only horses, you're like, I guess I'm a horse.
Just a runt of a horse. Yeah. You know, I was reading through Matt, you know, Dr. Zakreski gives presentations all over the place, and I was looking over the materials he'll use, and the concept of development is something we think about a lot on this show, Matt. And I really like thinking about development emotionally, socially, cognitively, morally. Can you talk about like development as it comes to the neurodivergent people?
So like, this is one of the most, I think it's such a foundational piece of understanding this. It's going to take a little legwork to get there, but I'm sure we can do it. So,
okay, I believe in our crew.
Yeah, right. We got this, right? We're good at this. So, neurotypical people develop synchronously, right? So, if you're 10 years old, you are 10 in basically everything you do. You're 10 socially, emotionally, physically, intellectually, academically. That hangs together. There might be a little bit of spread, but it's more or less you're 10 in everything you do.
When you go to the pediatrician, how many blocks, how many words, how can you hold a fork, right? Those developmental milestones.
Right? Yeah. I mean, and that's where the norms are supposed to be. 68% of people are within one standard deviation of the norm. That's most people. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. When you're neurodivergent, your brain develops in a different way. It develops asynchronously or out of sync. So if instead of each of the 5 pieces of the chart getting 20% of developmental energy, because there's a finite amount of energy, let's say intellectual and academic each get, instead of 20%, they each get 40%. So you've got 60% of your pie chart in those two things. Now you've got to split the other 40% among the other 3 developmental areas: social, emotional, and physical. And this is, broadly speaking, what we see a lot of neurodivergent people, kids who are super smart, but below the developmental curve, socially, emotionally, and physically. I cannot tell you how many kids I work with who seek to avoid gym class like the plague because the idea of catching a ball, their brain is just not good at it. So it's like, I can recite pi to 209 digits. I know every element on the periodic table. I can write you a damn good sonnet. But if we are playing volleyball, I'm going to die. I'm going to be very bad at this thing.
And even less direct with the interest. You were just talking about your friend who knew all the basketball stats, but couldn't play basketball. So it doesn't even mean you don't like those maybe athletic things or you can't appreciate it, but just, it speaks to kids. Like, would you be drawn to something you're not good at? I think we can all understand that. Like, well, if you can't catch or throw a ball, are you going to enjoy watching other people do it? But it's interesting there, Matt. Is that where like savant, like autistic savant comes from? Is it that asynchronous development that lines people up for that?
Yeah. I mean, this is, savants are in that sort of like, so gifted kids are 1 out of 50, right? So then the 98th percentile, savants are like more like 1 in 10,000. They're vanishingly rare. I just assessed a kid recently who had a 178 IQ. Like, this kid is a freaking unicorn, right? Like,
hundreds average, half of people below 100. So if y'all are picturing a bell curve, that's where Dr. Zakreski was saying 68% are within one standard dev. Yeah. So I don't know the last time our audience went to stats class. Man.
Yeah.
Right. So 178 would make almost twice as, that's crazy.
Well, I mean, and the way I explained it to this kid is like, so if gifted is 2 standard deviations past average IQ, profoundly gifted is 2 standard deviations past gifted. This kid is another standard deviation past that. I was like, you are one of one, my friend. You are a very unique human, and we are going to find environments that support your very unique human brain, because this is not a kid who can go to public elementary school. It's just not good. Like, it's just not going to fit him. Like, he reads books like they're going out of style. Right.
Yeah.
It's funny. He was humming Hamilton, like, why do you ride like you're running out of time? Like, that's him. And like, so, but the really important thing, if we zoom out on this concept of savantism for a second, is like, let's say this kid got 95% developmental energy for intelligence. And then we're splitting the other 5% among academic, social, emotional, and physical skills. So each of them are getting 1.25%. Now, this is a very hyperbolic example to prove a point, but the idea is that kid might be 8 years old. We cannot treat him like an 8-year-old. We have to treat him intellectually like a 40-year-old, because that's how his brain is. And probably he's going to be well below functional level. Because we can't treat him like an 8-year-old socially or emotionally, right? Yeah. So we got to meet this kid in all the places he is, because he's going to have different levels. And we call this in, broadly speaking, in the neurodivergent world, we call this the rule of 5, because every neurodivergent person is 5 people.
They're, as in like what their strengths are, like what percentages of each of those categories. Interesting.
Yeah. Like what their developmental ages are. So like, I'll work, I remember that, going back to me for an example, right? Like being freshman in high school, that story, I was 14 years old, about to turn 15. Intellectually, I was probably in my 20s. Academically, I was definitely later high school. Emotionally, pretty much age appropriate, right? I had myself together. Physically, I was a decent athlete. Not great, but decent. I could hold my own. But socially, right, I had really struggled, because when the rules of the game change in middle school, when everybody starts going through puberty and boy-girl parties become a thing, right? Like, I just did not, if it was Fast and the Furious, I had no more gears to shift into, right?
Shout out Kim and her in the bedroom story, shout out Kim, pour one out.
Oh, it's
pour
just
one out for,
I'm gonna have a stiff drink later. That's for sure. So like, that's where that asynchrony raises its ugly head, because you don't have the skill set, right? And this gets back to this idea of, it's not that it's because neurodivergent kids won't do it. It's that they can't. They haven't wired those neurons yet. They don't have those skills. So like, if you meet them where they are at those developmental ages, you can teach them the skills they need based on where they are. I'm not going to assume a neurodivergent 14-year-old has the social skills of a neurotypical 14-year-old. I'd be like, yo, listen, man, hot girl comes up to you and says, oh my gosh, could you walk me to my room? what are you going to do? He's like, well, her room is over there. I could just point. I'm like, ah, you're one of mine. Very good. We're going to talk to you about, one of my favorite clients. He was in a situation in college where, there's this girl, they'd been talking for a while. They had watched Mighty Ducks 1 and Mighty Ducks 2. And she's like, hey, listen, don't make plans on Friday night. I'm coming over and I'm watching Mighty Ducks 3 with you. And he's like, okay. I'm like, so dude, like I know this is an asynchrony for you. Let me say what I think is probably happening here. I was like, so what are you going to do if she walks in the door, she shuts the door, and she's like, oh no, I forgot the movie. And this kid, hand to God, looks at me and goes, well, I mean, it's probably on Netflix. And I wanted to reach through the computer and murder him. Just like,
we're trying to get you laid, brother. We're trying to get you laid.
Oh, my sweet honey child. Okay, no, well, that's fine. It's fine because I'm meeting you where you are. And I was like, so calling somebody out doesn't help them grow. You call them in. I'm like, so right. I think this is what she might mean by this. And she was like, and he looked at me, he's like, sure, I have to wash my sheets. I'm like, don't wash your sheets. Right?
Every college boy needs to go wash their sheets.
He's like, throw the sheets in the thing. Throw the sheets. So like,
every college boy needs to wash
their sheets. Every college boy, right?
That's the lesson here, if I've ever heard anything.
Yeah, wash your sheets, guys, and get a goddamn air freshener, please. Your room smells like balls. Not a great look.
Separate thought. Love the Mighty Ducks references because the third one, like, it's only kind of worth watching. It's like,
yeah, it's mid.
They could have stopped at 2. I get what they were going for, but 2 is a work of art. I don't know what. That's awesome.
The thing that blows my mind about the Mighty Ducks is that they go from being the best hockey team in their city to the best hockey team in the world to not the best hockey team in their own high school. Like, right. What?
Right. Like, you would think that they'd make varsity at any school if they were even if they're freshmen, right? If they were the best 8th graders in the world, you would still think they would make, No, it's, hey, we suspend reality. I don't want to ruin Mighty Ducks for our audience. We're not talking Santa the Easter Bunny, it's everything can be retained. So as far as, I'm interested because we've got parents in the crowd as well as younger people. Do you have steps for parents? What's a good place to start if they wonder if their kid may be neurodivergent?
So there's a lot of great neurodivergent platforms out there. I certainly try to put a lot of stuff out there. I think that there's a group out of the Pacific Northwest called Bright and Quirky Kids. That's a great place to start. I would contact your state gifted organization. The vast majority of states have them. Get some more information there. And honestly, it's great to talk to a psychologist who specializes in this, and not even from like a therapy perspective, though certainly I think that's helpful, but just in like I think this might be my kid. What are my next steps? What do I need to know? Because then I can point you in the direction to get the right information for you and your kid. I assessed a kid recently. The parents were very sure he was gifted. He's not gifted in that sense. He's a very smart kid. What he is dyslexic. He's very dyslexic. And dyslexia doesn't just come with I can't read. It comes with a lot of really cool stuff like spatial memory. He's a great problem solver. He's great at what we call project-based learning. Like, this kid will build you anything. So instead of plugging him into their state gifted organization, I was like, here's your state's dyslexia organization. They're going to honor that journey. We got him set up for a school that plays to dyslexia strengths while supporting the reading. And I'm telling you, like, it's like this kid, seeing him recently was like in between seasons of a TV show where they recast a character and they're just hotter. It's like, I'm sorry. Who the fuck are you? He's like, sup? I'm like, oh, you're confident now. He's like, I was just like, people like me because he's in the right environment. Right. Yeah. So, it enabled us to put a kid in an environment that was neurodivergent and affirming. And would you believe that all the other parts of him soared when he didn't have to spend so much mental energy worrying about, can I learn here?
You talked about testing. Is something that's like guaranteed? When should people pursue testing?
Testing is great because it's one of the few things in psychology that's concrete. If I do an IQ test on you, I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is what your IQ is. Testing is helpful because it allows us to put a name and a number on something, right? There's a lot of reasons your kid might have trouble paying attention. ADHD is one of them. So if we assess for ADHD and it comes back like we've met criteria for that, great, we can move in that direction. If it doesn't, then that allows me as a psychologist to pivot into what are the other reasons a kid might not be able to pay attention, one of which is giftedness, right? The kid is gifted. He doesn't need to pay attention to what's going on because his brain's already figured it out. So like, there's no guarantee, but it is always a great place to start. And if you go to public school, you can request your school's psychologist to assess your kid at any time for free, right? It's part of what your taxes pay for. So like, I don't mean to take business out of my own pocket here, but like, I would rather a family start at the school, ask the child study team to look at their kid. Let's get an IQ. Let's get an ADHD scale. Let's get an autism scale. See what comes back. And if they can't do it, or they won't do it, or, then you come to somebody like me and I can point you in the right direction. As I often say to parents, it's like assessments are only going to help you because now you know more about yourself than you did 3 weeks ago. And we can take that information and put you in the right environment, ask for the right supports. If you're a really anxious kid and you're perfectionistic, and I can give you a little bit extra time to do your test so you don't quite feel so anxious, well, then that's an easy accommodation to get you. You're going to do better in school. You're going to feel better about yourself, right? These are simple things, but it's easier to ask for them from a place of, we have this data, rather than from a place of, trust me, I'm a fancy doctor guy.
Yeah, and I like it. And I like to, refer for psychological testing, especially with my kids. So psychiatrists, y'all, we do not own psychological testing. So I've seen some of that stuff. I've been in the room. But if I'm wondering, what a kid's specific learning styles are, if they have dyslexia or if they struggle, I have one of my adults, Matt, that I wanted her to get tested for dyscalculia. And I was like, I don't know what the fuck I do other than how smart she is peril to what little math she can do. What I worry about, and I want to, get close to wrapping here, is this can help us learn how to function better versus a label, right? So how do you try to walk the line with people about like, the reason we need a diagnosis is to figure out treatment, as opposed to you getting to wear a badge of honor, or as you said, maybe make excuses as you'd referenced before.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much a way to level set the conversation in a way that just elevates all the information we know. And, you asked me before, like, are assessments guaranteed? They're not. They are an art and a science, right? I tested a kid once whose IQ came out at 119, and the school's like, oh, he's not gifted. I was like, oh, hold on, but look at all these other numbers, look at all these other things. Like, that's where expertise matters, right? Because then I can help you tease apart those data. But the idea here is that we do diagnosis largely for two reasons. One is for clarity, and clarity is important. The second is for access. I was trained in Pennsylvania. In the Pennsylvania Children's Medicaid, if you had an ADHD or an autism diagnosis, your children's Medicaid was free, right? Mm-hmm. And, so like now you're not paying however extra much money into that program, right? You are getting that money back, as it were. And so when a family came to me and said, does my kid have ADHD? We'd look at it because it would allow us to gain clarity and give them access to like certain schools, certain medication, and certain insurance programs that honestly make your life easier, right? So like I said before, we're not trying to gatekeep anything. It's about clarity of purpose, but the right diagnosis opens so many doors. And those doors are probably going to be more affirming than the environments you're in right now.
And it's such an important part of treatment, Matt. What are, thinking about like the right diagnosis begets the right treatment. What are some of the, without too much, but some of the pillars that you think of treatment for neurodivergent people? It's a wide question for conditions that can look a lot of different ways, I know.
Right. Well, we talked about the asynchrony, so we're going to meet people where they are. That's vital. Then I think it's a lot about skill building, right? People, it's so easy to hide in processing, like, let's talk about it forever.
Yeah.
Right. Instead, it's like, hey, you want to learn how to do small talk because you got an event coming up? I'm going to teach you how to small talk. I remember I had a female client several years ago, very pretty young woman, right, who was getting back on a dating scene, and this girl did not know how to selfie, right? So she's selfieing like with the under the chin look. Like, I was like, you are, but nobody looks good from this angle up, right? So I was like, look, phone up here, give us a little pout face. These are things that are
Oh,
going.
this was the duck face. This was the duck
Yeah,
face era. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
sure.
it was the late teens. We didn't know any better. But I was like,
Yeah, yeah.
look how much hotter you are in this picture, right? And she's like,
Hmm.
oh my God, I'm hot. I'm like, yes, good. We know this
Do you
now.
think you could diagnose, autism spectrum based on the photos people choose for their dating profiles?
I mean, it certainly would point us in a direction, right?
It always made me think, like, what in fucking, like,
Yeah.
you don't get, guys, girl, doesn't matter. Like those picture choices, I'm like, oof. So you're right. Skill building. We can't assume people know, whether it be emotion regulation skills for those kids, social skills, any other themes that you see as areas of focus that might be different from normal talk therapy.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, including that psychoeducation we've been talking about, like the putting the stuff in context, the skill building, and then honestly, sometimes my job feels more like a social work thing because I'm connecting people to resources and
Yep.
communities that are not just therapy. But one of the things I see, and actually, this is just sort of how I see the world anyway, I think there are things that are therapeutic that aren't therapy, right?
Hmm.
If I can find a kid a support group, if I can find the kid the right school, if I can find a kid a Boy Scout troop that the guy is really patient and he's not a hard ass, like those are things that are therapeutic. This person's finding community, right? This is not having your buddy Steve drive to the airport to pick up your girlfriend, knowing Steve's, just going to take that girlfriend. Like, like
Yeah.
anybody else, dude, anybody else on campus could have done a better job, right? So it's about connecting people to resources because they're lucky if they get me an hour a week. Usually it's an hour every other week, right?
Yeah.
So things that are more repeatable and systemic, they become as impactful, if not even more impactful than the work that you and I do as mental health professionals, because it really is, it's about reps and it's about exposure. And those are things that we cannot really give you in the therapy space. We can start that conversation. I can put the
Yep.
seed in the earth, but I need to take you to a greenhouse if you're going to grow.
Yeah, it's so true. 45 minutes a week or every other week, right? It really does require practice. We've learned that, on the show, we've talked CBT and DBT skills, anything like that. It is going to require you to practice outside of session. So it's awesome that you get to reach those kids where they're at. Matt, I'm going to ask everybody in this block to as they represent something to tell me, like, if somebody was taking one thing away from our interview today, what would you want them to take away?
Gosh, that's a great question. The thing I want you to take away is that neurodivergence is not a superpower. It's also not a curse. It is a series of strengths and weaknesses, right? And the more we know about that, the more we can adapt what we're doing in life to meet those strengths and weaknesses, right? So parents are afraid of labels and parents are afraid of, they're looking for that badge of honor. I mean, listen, it's neither of those things, but it can open those doors, and most of those doors empty out into more supportive places. It is just another thing for you to know about yourself, but it's something that's going to help you a lot.
Yeah. If you can construct your life or your kid's life around, those strengths and weaknesses. And Dr. Matt, thank you so much. My goal on this show being, I want you to listen to this show or watch this show and think about something you did not intend on thinking about when you woke up this morning. Learn something, take one thing away. So we're going to focus on that. So otherwise, Dr. Matt, I want to end with, every week we do a Bromotions Hall of Fame. So you've seen those on the internet where we focus on. So do you have any examples of men, famous men who have done awesome work that you think we should focus on in our neurodivergent, Bromotions Hall of Fames this block?
Oh my gosh. So there's lots of men that we could shout out for this, but I'm going to choose Nick Offerman. We love Ron Swanson. We're here for some Ron Swanson. He's just such a great example of a guy who is what we want masculinity to look like. A guy who can be that badass with an axe, but also isn't afraid to cry at a sappy movie, and who unabashedly loves his wife.
Such a great example. We've used him already. Our producer, Richie, is Nick Offerman fanboy. So he picked him out a long, long time ago.
Another good one is Justin Willman from Magic for Humans. He is a wildly gifted person. He's super ADHD. And yes, he did leave his wife, but he struggles so openly with addiction, but he's made that a rallying point, not a mark of shame. And I think that's a really compelling journey. And I gotta shout out, of course, my boy Kevin Smith from the Jay and Silent Bob movies. Did I spend most of middle school and high school hanging out in his comic book store? Yes, I did. Thank you for asking. So like, but there's a guy who's like gone to bat so many times for his best friend who has openly struggled with addiction and mental health stuff. Like he's created essentially a cottage industry around getting his friend work. And like, he's such an advocate for creativity. He's such an advocate for empowering, female characters. And he pushes back on like that toxic fandom bullshit, right? He's like, hey, like he was the one who's jumping into DMs and defending, was it Marie Tan from Force Awakens? Like when people were just destroying her in the comments, like he's like, she's a great actress. This is an interesting part. You guys get over yourselves because like seriously, Star Wars is for everybody. Go fuck yourself if you don't think so. Like,
yeah, it's great. Yeah, I know he's been done a lot in the industry over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that an example I often use when I'm speaking at conferences about this is Bobby Flay, the celebrity chef. Like Bobby Flay has ADHD and dyslexia, right? So he's like, to this day, I still don't read the contracts that I do on the Food Network because like I can't read them. So like my assistant reads them and I trust them. But like this is a guy who almost failed out of high school until he convinced his guidance counselor let him do a gym class in a restaurant. And now he's got a food empire, right? So it could be really anything. But like Bobby Flay is another example, like, and it's so interesting that like basically everybody we mentioned is famous and successful at what they do. But like none of these people are known for their like brain intelligence, right? None of them are like, oh, I'm a very, very smart human. Like they're all very talented. They're all very elaborate.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Dr. Zakreski, again, if you're interested in understanding, I think Dr. Zakreski's book, Neurodiversity Playbook, not only speaks in bro code, but accessible language for kids and young adults, and really meant to, if you're not considering yourself neurodivergent, but help understand what the world might be like and how you can best support those people in your life, family, friends, work, and those things like that. So Dr. Zakreski, thanks so much for joining, brother. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I'm so glad we did this, man. And I've got to jump. I've got a client waiting for me right now. So I got to scoot.
All right. We'll be back for Bromotions Hall of Fame after this. See y'all. All right, y'all. It had been a little while since we took the Bromotions Hall of Fame back into the time machine, so I'm happy to start the neurodiversity block, BHoF inductee Charles Darwin. Born February 12, 1809 in Shropshire, England, he is considered the other father of development outside of the psychological kind that we think of. What is Charles Darwin known? We know Chucky D, best known for his Galapagos Island experiments and his work on the theory of evolution and survival of the fittest. We use that all the time. Really big in the way that we think about things, right? That humans are not static, that we had to develop over time, and most importantly, we had to develop in order to thrive. Why Charles Darwin right now? Not a diagnosis of neurodivergence, of autism, of ADHD did not exist at the time. All data, all anecdotal data about Charles supports that he likely would have been considered neurodivergent at the time. An intense ability to focus with extraordinary intelligence and attention to detail, preferred solitude, avoided social interactions, preferred writing over verbal communication, obsessions, and struggled in general with emotions and intimacy into his adulthood. So, it's an interesting thing when you look back on the life of Charles Darwin that he was really revolutionary in thinking about this. And if you look and go back and look on his life, his papers were used against him. And he had to go on the defensive a lot because people were using his logic, his idea of evolution and survival of the fittest to support eugenics or selective breeding in order to produce a master race, a la the Holocaust. He himself was staunchly against slavery, racism, sexism, selective breeding. As you might imagine, somebody in the neurodivergent community, they're very pro rules and pro ethics and morals. He has had to defend that a lot. And it's interesting, for one of the most important scientific discoveries of all time, we have his neurodivergence to thank. Not a hindrance, right, in his eyes. He recalled in his 1876 autobiography, Recollections of the Development of My Mind and Character, quote, "Lastly, I've had ample leisure from not having to earn my own bread. Even ill health, though it has annihilated several years of my life, has saved me from the distractions of society and amusement. So he considered those things a distraction to better work as opposed to things that we should be imbibing in and things that allowed him to stay focused on his work. So again, why Charles Darwin? One, because we can really think of him in the sense of understanding that people need to grow and change, and that evolution remains one of the most important and revolutionary discoveries of all time in human scientific research. And that, hey, his neurodivergence helped us understand that. It was not a hindrance to him, but something that made him as great as he was. So thank you, Charles. And we'll be right back to wrap up the show. All right, let's wrap the show as we do and cite our sources. So the Super Bowl commercials, we just were talking. I took notes during the Super Bowl, to believe it or not, so that we were ready to talk about things this week. Playbook, you can find anywhere that you get. We were definitely citing some of Dr. Zakreski's book as we talked about things, and his work can be found. He lectures all over the country, and you can find his podcast also, the Nerding Out on Neurodiversity podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and also on Instagram and other socials. As far as the BHoF and Charles Darwin, again, used a lot of Wikipedia and some other sources to help learn more and more about who was a truly interesting man. So what were our 3 takeaways from today? 1, with the Super Bowl ads. 1, these feelings are everywhere, baby. Media is important. How it is being used, what messages it is sending to our grander audience. We cannot ignore that stuff, not especially now in such important times. 2, our boy Dr. Matt, cool dude. Look forward to having him on again. We can celebrate the differences in everybody and understand that in order to be kinder, gentler people, we need to get out of our own head and understand what's going on inside the world, the inner worlds of other people. Hence the point of learning this over the next few weeks. Finally, Charles Darwin taught us the most important lesson is that in order to thrive, we have to continue to adapt and grow. All right, that is an important part of becoming a KGB, is always learning, always growing, never assuming we know everything. So I'm excited to continue on this neurodiversity block over the next few weeks. Hope y'all feel like you're setting the stage to learn a lot and build empathy and insight. I know I am. As always, let's find ways to be kinder and gentler out in this world. We'll see you next time.